All right, now this may sound surprising, but 9 members of Israel's governing coalition in opposition have submitted a bill to raise the country's minimum wage by more than a third. Now, if enacted, it would go up to $12.50 an hour. That's 40 shekels. The Israeli politicians behind the bill say it will help increase buying power and the incentive to be active in the market. But is that true? Joining us to break it down is I-24 News host and economic analyst Ariel Margalit. So why is this bill being introduced now? I mean, what has triggered it?
It's true, we have 9 members of parliament out of 120, but we are due to see a lot of objections in parliament,
That's
mostly
fair.
because when the minimum wage increases, it could also cause unemployment. And this is the main challenge for a bill like this to go forward, because basically we're talking about private sector. Once a bill like this goes ahead, people might not be able to afford these employees. The minimum wage right now in Israel is 5,300 shekels a month. We're talking about an increase of about 35%. So they would like to increase it to around 40 shekels per an hour, as you mentioned.
But how does Israel's minimum wage compare to the region and to other OECD nations?
So in the region, most countries don't have a minimum wage. Our neighborhood here is not known as being very advanced when it comes to the rights of workers, etc. There are some countries, mainly in the Gulf, that have some of these laws. Qatar was one of the last ones to enact a law like this for minimum wage. But of course, Israel wants to compare itself to OECD countries and to the West. So right now, Israel is on the lower end of where numbers stand with regards to minimum wage salaries. We compare right now more or less to Spain and the Netherlands that are on the low end. If Israel were to increase the minimum wage to 40 shekels per hour, an increase of 35%, it would put us more or less on par with Australia and very close to the US.
As somebody who lives in Tel Aviv, the most expensive city in this country, I'm thinking about the cost of living, because I think for many people seeing a rise in salary would be a great thing, but there are downsides to this as well. And like you said, there's probably going to be a lot of opposition. Could you break that down for us?
So mainly the opposition would come from people objecting this from the private sector and parliamentarians that are lobbying for private sector, of course, to protect this. The thing is, if salaries were increased in, let's say, government or across the public sector, that would have been fine. Maybe the government has, taxes where it can bring these extra funds from. But where you're talking about the private sector, a lot of the businesses that employ these people don't do that well themselves. We're talking about just half a year since Corona has more or less stabilized. Many businesses are still suffering, and even the owners of these businesses often don't make so much more than the minimum salary. And hence, if you increase that minimum wage, they might not be able to afford as many employees, and that might cause unemployment. So that would be the #1 debate.
I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Ariel, with this breakdown. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with this bill, if anything does happen.
Thank you, Natasha.